"Get your wrinkled hands off that stool," the biker snarled, landing a punch squarely on the elderly man's jaw. Blood streamed down his cheek as he stumbled backward, crashing into a table but refusing to fall. Not a soul in the packed bar moved. The only sound was the soft clink of a glass behind the counter. The man straightened slowly, opened his phone, and dialed a number. Then he sat, silent, on a bench outside the bar. Rain had started to fall in soft misty sheets, soaking his coat, but he didn't move. A breeze rustled the American flag above the tavern's doorway. Jack McCleary's cheek throbbed, but his gaze remained fixed on the ground, unmoving. People came and went, no one asked if he was okay. Inside, laughter echoed and music returned to full volume. His presence had already been erased. The bartender, a man Jack had known since he was a teenager, glanced once through the window and then looked away. That hurt more than the punch. It had taken years to rebuild Miller's Bar after the fire, and Jack had worked side by side with volunteers, hammering boards and rewiring the jukebox himself. His presence was woven into the place like old timber under fresh varnish. Still, not a word. Not a hand extended. Just a flicker of embarrassment from a regular who looked his way and quickly turned back to his drink. Jack sighed quietly. Not in defeat, never that, but in recognition. Some things weren't built to last. Except duty. And the past never truly let go of men like him. A soft buzz vibrated in his coat pocket. He glanced at the screen. No response yet. That was good. That meant wheels were turning. Inside, the biker slouched in Jack's old stool, tipping back his beer with a sneer. He didn't notice the young waitress at the far end, shaking, slipping her phone into her apron pocket. Or the busboy who'd paused, staring at Jack through the fogged-up glass, biting his lip in guilt. Outside, Jack sat motionless. Just waiting. Jonathan "Jack" McCleary had always been a man of ritual. At 86, his spine wasn't as straight as it had once been, but his posture still spoke of decades in uniform. He rose before dawn each morning, shaved with the precision of a man who once led pre-dawn operations, and folded his clothes with corners squared like barracks sheets. The morning of the incident at Miller's Bar had started no differently, eggs soft-boiled, coffee black, shoes polished. Jack lived in a modest single-story home at the edge of town, tucked between a shuttered gas station and a memorial park. Most of his neighbors didn't know his name. He didn't expect them to. But the few who did, usually older men who stopped by the VFW post on Thursdays, knew enough to nod with quiet respect when they passed him on the sidewalk. Once, Jack had led men through Vietnamese jungle paths so dense they swallowed sound. He'd served 2 tours there, then rotated through embassies and advisory posts across Southeast Asia. In Beirut, he'd pulled wounded civilians out of bombed buildings under sniper fire. Later, stateside, he became a trainer for special operations, known for discipline and silence. Never sought medals. Never spoke in detail about what he'd seen. His daughter Elise had to dig through his footlocker to learn half of it. After his wife passed 10 years earlier, cancer, sudden and cruel, Jack stopped traveling. Their house had become his memory vault, with her laughter echoing faintly in every room. He'd taken up small repairs around town, volunteered at the library, and walked the same path to Miller's Bar every Saturday afternoon. It wasn't about the drinks, it was the ritual. He'd cleaned tables for free after the fire in 1987, mopped floors, rewired ceiling fans. The current owner barely remembered that. But the stool by the jukebox remembered. The knot in the floorboard that only Jack stepped over. The plaque in the back with names of donors, where his and his wife's names were etched in brass. Jack never asked for attention. He brought his towel with him each week, an old green one from the Beirut base, still stitched with a faded unit number, and cleaned tables out of habit. Most thought he was just an old man too stubborn to leave. A relic. But Elise knew different. Growing up, She'd seen her father move like a ghost through military halls, respected by men twice his rank. She'd watched him mourn quietly, love fiercely, and rebuild his life with discipline that even grief couldn't erode. He taught her how to salute before she knew how to ride a bike. And when she'd told him she wanted to join the Navy, he hadn't smiled. Just nodded, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said, "Then don't do it halfway." Elise had followed that advice to the letter. Rising through the ranks of naval special warfare, she earned her own name. Some in the field called her Ghost Daughter, a nod to her father's call sign and the silence that surrounded both of them. That Saturday, as Jack walked the cracked sidewalk to Miller's, towel in his back pocket, he paused briefly by the old elm where he and his wife once shared summer lunches. The air smelled like coming rain. The kind of rain that softened brick and memory. Inside the bar, he greeted the staff with a slight nod. He didn't speak unless spoken to. Just headed to his usual spot, pulled out the towel, and began wiping down the corner table, his quiet offering to a place he still believed in. He didn't expect trouble. But he recognized at the moment the door opened and the bikers came in. They weren't the regulars, no chipped helmets, no patched stories shared with laughter. These were strangers. Branded with a gang name Jack didn't recognize. Loud. Entitled. One of them kicked a chair aside and barked for drinks before even finding a seat. Jack kept to his work. Polished the tabletops. Didn't meet their gaze. But when a pint glass tipped over and beer spread across the varnished wood, muscle memory took over. He stepped forward with his towel. A simple gesture. That's when the punch landed. There was a time when Jack could have dodged it. Maybe even retaliated. But he didn't lift a hand. Just took the hit, stepped back, absorbed the pain like he had countless times before. And as the room went still, and no one moved to help him, Jack realized something deeper than betrayal. They didn't recognize him. Not just who he was, but what he'd done. What he represented. So he stepped outside. Called Elise. Told her, in his calmest voice, "There's been a little trouble at Miller's." Then he sat down and waited. Not for rescue. For reckoning. The laughter inside the bar was loud enough to mask the aftershock, but not loud enough to drown out the silence that followed Jack's exit. The biker who'd struck him, the tallest of the crew, thick-necked and wearing mirrored aviators even indoors, smirked as he planted himself on Jack's stool like a dog marking territory. He raised his bottle toward the bar. "One more round. On the house. Or do I need to negotiate again?" The bartender hesitated. His name was Cody. Jack had helped his dad string lights on Miller's porch one Christmas when Cody was 7. Now, he wiped his palms on his apron and muttered, "You'll pay like everyone else." The biker laughed. "Sure. Put it on the McCleary tab." He raised his bottle again and mock-toasted the door. "To Captain America." The other bikers howled. One tossed a coaster like a frisbee, hitting a framed newspaper article that featured Jack after the bar's 1987 reopening. The glass cracked. No one moved to fix it. At a side booth, the young waitress, her name was Marissa, stood frozen. She'd only been working at Miller's for 3 months, but she'd heard about old Jack. Everyone had. Quiet guy. Never missed a Saturday. Wiped down tables even if they weren't dirty. Left exact change for his drinks, including tip. Sometimes brought homemade cookies around Christmas, wrapped in wax paper. She looked toward the door where Jack had gone out. Rain streaked the glass. His silhouette sat on the bench, unmoving, like a statue nobody noticed. "This isn't right," she whispered. Her coworker, a lanky busboy with earbuds dangling from his collar, gave a quick shake of his head. "Don't. Not worth it. You don't know these guys." "I know him," she said. But still, she didn't move. Neither did Cody. Or the manager, Rick, who watched everything from the far corner of the bar. Rick had taken over from his uncle 5 years earlier, had never served in the military, and didn't like hero worship. Jack annoyed him. He thought the old man's towel wiping was performative. Nostalgia disguised as obligation. But Rick also knew what the plaque in the back room said. To those who built this place with their hands and hearts. And Jack's name was right there. Second line. Still, Rick looked away. Lit a cigarette inside and didn't even apologize. Outside, Jack remained still. The pain had dulled to a background hum. He dabbed his towel gently against his cheek. A purple bruise was forming. He could already tell it would swell shut by nightfall. He wasn't angry. Not in the way people assumed anger looked. He didn't tremble. Didn't curse. He sat, watching the rain drip from the edge of the bench onto his boots, and let time pass. Inside, the bikers grew louder. They played their own music from a Bluetooth speaker, drowning out the jukebox. At 5:32 p.m., Elise received the call. She had just returned from a briefing and saw the name flash on her phone. "Dad? There's been a little trouble at Miller's," he said calmly. Her spine stiffened. "Are you hurt?" "Just a bruise. Nothing broken." "Do I need to come get you?" "No. I just thought you should know." That was Jack's speak for yes. She didn't ask more. She ended the call and immediately contacted Naval Security. Not for weapons. Not for retaliation. For witness verification, documentation, and presence. Respect, delivered with precision. Meanwhile, Marissa stepped out the back door and pulled out her phone. She knew someone, her older brother's roommate, stationed at Norfolk. She typed, "Elderly veteran assaulted at Miller's. No one's doing anything. He needs help. Please. Just, do something." She hit send, chest pounding. A few blocks away, a retired Marine sitting in a barbershop read the message his nephew forwarded and stood up mid-trim. "I'll be right back," he muttered to the barber, grabbing his old field jacket from the coat rack. Word travels fast when the wrong person gets heard in the right way. At 5:48 p.m., the bartender got a call from a blocked number. The voice on the other end said, "Don't serve those men another drink. And don't clean the blood off that floor." He didn't ask who it was. Just hung up and stepped away from the counter. The bar's energy shifted. The bikers noticed but didn't understand it yet. "Hey," the tall one barked. "Where's our second round?" The bartender stared at him and didn't answer. The biker rose from Jack's stool and started toward the bar. "I asked you a question." Then headlights flared through the window. Matte gray. Government issue. The kind of vehicle that never parks just for a drink. A beat passed. The bar fell silent. Someone whispered, is that?" The front doors opened. And in walked Lieutenant Commander Elise McCleary. Elise crossed the threshold of Miller's bar with the calm precision of someone trained to take in every variable before speaking. Her khaki uniform was crisp, adorned not with medals but with the quiet authority that came from years in naval special warfare. Her black leather shoes barely made a sound on the hardwood floor as 6 sailors followed behind, evenly spaced, every movement coordinated. No weapons were drawn. No commands were shouted. Their presence alone stilled the room like a curtain falling before a final act. Jack had raised her never to posture. She didn't need to now. Her posture was the answer. Inside the bar, no one moved. No bottles clinked. The jukebox lights blinked, but no music played. The Bluetooth speaker that had been blasting outlaw country earlier had fallen silent mid-song. One of the bikers instinctively reached for the volume knob but thought better of it. Elise walked forward without breaking eye contact with anyone. Her eyes scanned the room, faces avoiding hers, guilt pooling like water in the corners. She stopped directly in front of the man who had struck her father. The tall biker with mirrored shades still clutched a half-finished beer and was now struggling to look indifferent. She tilted her head slightly. "Where is the man who struck Captain Jonathan McCleary?" He blinked. "Who?" "Try again." The silence became oppressive. Even the air felt heavier. Then Jack's voice echoed, not from outside but from the massive flat-screen television above the bar. Elise had forwarded the video from his call. He'd dialed in and left the phone recording in his pocket. One of her techs had pulled the footage directly from the cloud and queued it up as she entered. The screen played the crucial 10 seconds, Jack stepping forward, towel in hand. The punch. The stumble. The blood. The silence. A visible wince crossed more than one face. Cody, the bartender, looked down at the bar as though he wanted to disappear. Rick, the manager, stepped out from behind the cooler and froze, pale and speechless. Elise turned, slow and deliberate, to face him. "You're the manager?" Rick nodded. "You watched?" He gave a weak shrug. "I didn't realize." Her voice was flat. "That he was a veteran? Or that he was a human being?" Rick's mouth opened, but no words came out. Elise walked toward the cracked picture frame. She lifted it gently and set it on the bar. "This is him," she said to the room. "The man who helped rebuild this place when it burned. Who wiped your tables without being asked. Who donated the jukebox and repaired your ceiling fans. He did all that when most of you weren't even old enough to spell service. And when he was assaulted, here, not a single one of you moved. No one spoke." Elise stepped back and turned again to the biker. "Your name?" "Jake," he muttered. "Well, Jake," she said, pulling out a folder from one of her sailor's hands, "you're about to learn what accountability feels like. This is a sworn affidavit from 3 witnesses, one being your own friend, who confirmed that you struck a decorated U.S. veteran without provocation. You'll be held under federal assault charges under Title 18, Section 1389. And since you chose to commit this in a public establishment tied to federal veteran programs, you've managed to escalate it to a potential hate crime." Jake paled. "You'll come with us." Quietly. 2 of the sailors moved forward, not to restrain, but to escort. Jake didn't resist. He looked around, perhaps hoping someone would rise in his defense. No one did. Even his own crew kept their heads down. Elise turned back to Rick. "You let this happen. He built this place. You watched him bleed and did nothing." Rick stammered. I didn't know who he was." "You didn't need to. What you did told us who you are." She walked to the entrance, paused, and looked back at the rest of the bar. "This isn't just about my father. This is about how you treat people who give more than they take. If you couldn't respect the man, you should have at least respected the uniform." Then she stepped outside. Jack was still sitting on the bench. The rain had stopped, though the air was thick with moisture. His towel now hung loosely from his hand, stained with dried blood. She approached and stood at attention. "Captain McCleary, sir." Jack didn't smile. But he nodded. "You always told me to be calm under fire." He chuckled dryly. "You listened." They didn't speak for a moment. Then Elise looked over her shoulder. More vehicles were pulling up now. Not military, local veterans, neighbors, old friends. Word had spread. One man parked a motorcycle and took off his helmet slowly. He wore a battered denim vest covered in faded patches and walked up the bar steps with the weight of understanding. Inside, the bikers had been ushered out. The bar was still. And for the first time all day, someone picked up Jack's towel from where he had set it down. It was Marissa. She knelt to clean the bloodstain from the floor, tears in her eyes. Outside, Jack rose. Slowly. Elise offered her arm, but he waved it off. He stood with dignity, straight as age allowed. A small crowd had gathered now. And every single one of them was silent. Not in fear. In respect. 35 minutes after Jack had made the call, the street outside Miller's bar looked like something out of a film: matte gray Navy SUVs, a low-slung command transport with tinted windows, and one unmarked black vehicle that seemed to hum with unseen authority. Residents stepped onto porches, squinting into the evening light. Mothers called their kids inside. Veterans from the surrounding blocks emerged, some in caps, some simply standing in silent rows. Elise hadn't come to make a spectacle. But spectacle had arrived anyway. Inside the bar, the aftermath lingered like smoke. The cracked photo frame had been removed. The jukebox unplugged. Rick, the manager, sat alone in his office, staring at a folded American flag Jack had donated years ago. He didn't know why it was on his desk now. Only that someone had placed it there without a word. The bikers, now thoroughly stripped of bravado, sat in silence in the back of a military van. Jake, the one who threw the punch, stared at his bruised knuckles as if they belonged to someone else. "Where are we going?" one of them asked. "Detention and processing," replied the officer seated across from them. "You'll be charged, but that's not the worst of it." "What is?" Jake muttered. "The look your kids will give you when they see the footage." Outside, Elise stood beside her father as he leaned lightly on the bench for balance. A photographer from the Norfolk Chronicle had arrived, called in by a friend who served under Elise years ago. She raised her camera slowly, asking, "May I?" Jack didn't answer. Elise gave a single nod. The shutter clicked once. That photo would appear on the paper's front page the next morning under the headline, "Honor Stood Alone," until she arrived. Marissa, still inside, had taken charge of the bar without realizing it. Cody followed her lead as she moved from table to table, removing drinks, mopping quietly. She hadn't spoken since Elise left. But her presence radiated a kind of resolve that Rick had never shown in 5 years of management. When she reached the stool, the one Jack always sat on, she wiped the seat gently and stood back. Then she took a bar napkin, tore it in half, and folded it neatly into a triangle. She tucked it under the edge of the stool. A placeholder. A tribute. Within the hour, more veterans arrived. Some with canes. Some with walkers. Some in uniform. Others in jeans and old boots, their stories hidden in their eyes. None of them said much. They simply entered, found seats, and sat. One of them, Colonel Marcus Drake, retired, stepped to the front. He was a legend in town, rarely seen in public. He placed a single silver coin on the bar in front of Marissa. "I served with Jack in Beirut. He once carried me out of a building I couldn't crawl from." Marissa swallowed hard. "I didn't know." No one does until they need someone like him. The coin stayed on the bar. Others began adding to it, unit pins, challenge coins, patches, dog tags. Within an hour, a small pile formed, a silent archive of respect. Back outside, Elise pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I didn't think I'd need this," she said. Jack raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "Something I wrote after Mom died. A speech I never gave." He looked at her. "Why now?" "Because I've never seen you look smaller. Not physically. Just," she hesitated. "This place used to hold you up. And today, it let you fall." Jack looked down. "Places don't betray people, Lizzie. People do." She smiled faintly. Still quoting Granddad. Jack's father had served in Korea. The McCleary line was long with uniforms. And ghosts. Inside, Rick emerged at last. He walked straight to Jack, eyes down. I was wrong, he said. I saw it. I just didn't. I didn't think it was my place. Jack didn't answer. Rick fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a key, the key to the back room, the one locked since COVID had hit, where Jack used to lead Sunday breakfasts for veterans. He held it out. I want you to have it again. You should decide what happens back there. Jack took the key without looking at him. Then Elise said, "You'll also be installing a plaque." Rick blinked. Of course. I've already written the wording. She handed him a typed slip. It read, "This seat is reserved in honor of Captain Jonathan Jack McCleary, recon leader, rebuilder, friend." He asked nothing. He gave everything. Rick read it twice. "We'll hang it tonight." Veterans from the crowd helped. They found an old hammer and mounted the plaque above the stool. Jack stood, watching. For a moment, his hand trembled, but it wasn't from age. Elise stepped close. "We can leave if you want. Go home. Get you patched up." Jack looked at her. "No. I want to sit." So he did. On the stool. The same one he had wiped down week after week. The bar was quiet, but not empty. The people around him didn't speak, but their presence spoke volumes. Someone slid a fresh drink in front of him. Not beer. Not whiskey. Just a glass of water, clear and clean. Jack raised it slightly. Not a toast. Not a speech. Just acknowledgement. Elise stood behind him. Watching. Listening. Waiting. The final act wasn't anger. It wasn't triumph. It was recognition. Of silence. Of sacrifice. Of a name almost forgotten. But no longer. The following week, Miller's Bar opened its doors earlier than usual. Not for business, but for remembrance. Word had spread beyond Norfolk, local news outlets, veteran forums, even national morning shows had picked up the story of the elderly veteran who was struck and left to bleed in silence, only for his daughter, a decorated naval officer, to arrive with quiet justice. But for the people of this town, the story wasn't about spectacle. It was about something far deeper, failure, followed by redemption. The morning sun spilled across the new brass plaque mounted above Jack's stool. The words etched into the metal caught the light. This seat is reserved in honor of Captain Jonathan Jack McCleary, recon leader, rebuilder, friend. He asked nothing. He gave everything. The bar had been cleaned top to bottom. The jukebox, once dusty and forgotten, now gleamed. Elise had arranged for it to be repaired, replacing the cracked glass and updating the system inside while keeping its original shell. When it powered on, it still played songs from Jack's era, Glenn Campbell, Johnny Cash, the occasional Sam Cooke. But today, it played silence. Intentional, reverent silence. Jack arrived alone. He walked with a cane now, not from the incident, but because the weight of all that followed seemed to settle in his joints. Every Saturday before, he'd been invisible. Today, as he stepped onto the threshold of Miller's, the room stood. Veterans, families, students, the mayor, off-duty officers, and enlisted Navy personnel all stood shoulder to shoulder in quiet formation. Marissa stood near the door, a printed schedule tucked under her arm, trying not to fidget. She wore a navy blue dress with a small gold pin, a replica of Jack's service badge, a gift from Elise. The mayor stepped forward and offered a handshake. "Sir, thank you for coming." Jack nodded, wordless, and moved to his stool. As he sat, Elise entered from the side entrance. She was not in uniform today, just slacks, a tucked-in shirt, and that same unwavering presence. She stood behind him again, just like that day, a silent wall of strength. A small ceremony began. Marissa, now serving as Miller's official event coordinator, spoke first. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied. Some of us witnessed what happened and did nothing. Others acted. Today isn't just about what we remember, it's about how we move forward. She turned toward the plaque. This isn't just for Jack. It's for every person we overlook. Every hand we don't reach for. Every moment we choose comfort over courage. Applause followed, not loud, but sincere. Then came the surprise. Elise motioned to one of her sailors, who brought forward a framed letter. It bore the seal of the Department of Defense. She stepped up beside her father, looked to the crowd, and read. For distinguished service both on and off the field of battle, for exemplifying integrity, humility, and honor in civilian life, Captain Jonathan McCleary is hereby awarded the Department of the Navy Superior Public Service Medal. The medal, rarely given to civilians or veterans long retired, had been fast-tracked. Elise placed it gently around her father's neck. Jack blinked hard. He reached for the medal, his fingers brushing the edge. I thought they stopped giving these to ghosts, he said quietly. Elise smiled. Turns out, ghosts still have names. The room remained silent as Jack stood. I don't have much to say, he began, his voice hoarse. But I'll tell you this, I never cared about plaques or medals. I cared about what happens when no one's watching. That bar stool back there, he gestured, used to be just a seat. Now it's a reminder. He scanned the room slowly. Of what happens when you don't stand. Or when you finally do. The applause that followed was louder. Stronger. In the weeks that followed, Miller's transformed. Every Saturday at noon, the bar dimmed its lights for 60 seconds of silence. Not for Jack, but for all who had served and been forgotten. It became a tradition. Veterans began gathering there regularly, sharing stories, laughter, and memory. Marissa partnered with local colleges to launch a Civic Courage series, small forums where students and residents could talk about standing up when it's hard. The first guest speaker? A soft-spoken Marine named Leonard who had served with Jack in Beirut. Rick, the former manager, stepped down. Officially, he claimed it was to pursue other ventures. Unofficially, he told Cody in confidence, I wasn't the guy this place needed. Jack deserved better. Cody took over, but he never claimed the title. He listed himself as caretaker on business cards. A new mural was commissioned on the side of the bar, a painting of Jack in silhouette, seated on his stool, his worn towel in hand. Above him, the words, respect is a quiet thing. And Jack? He kept coming. Every Saturday. One rainy evening, months later, a boy rode past the bar on his bike, trailing his father. Who's that old guy everyone's saluting? He asked. The father didn't hesitate. That's Captain Jack McCleary. He reminds this town who we are. The boy looked again. Jack was seated by the jukebox, sipping water. He smiled at the boy through the window. No lecture. No fanfare. Just a presence that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. A week later, a faded sign was placed on the bar's bulletin board. Veterans welcome. Table always open. Speak, or be silent. We see you. And above Jack's seat, someone had taped a handwritten note. Thank you for reminding us that silence is not the same as peace. Jack saw it. He didn't touch it. Just gave it a small nod. The next Saturday, the crowd was larger. Elise couldn't attend, duty called, but she sent a bouquet of wildflowers. The note simply read, Dad, you always taught me that honor isn't loud. Turns out, it doesn't have to be. He folded the note and tucked it into his breast pocket. Rain tapped gently on the windows. Jack sat a little straighter. The jukebox lit up with an old favorite. And everyone, without being told, stood. Honor remembered.